So in this segment, we're going to be discussing the UK kind of doing more privatisation and the kind of disaster that it's going to be. And this stuff does make me nervous, especially for the future of the NHS. This is not good news.
Creeping privatisation?
Well, look, we've been using independent providers throughout.
So this is about the diagnostic centres the government is going to set up, with a load of them being private.
History of the NHS. Most GP practices are actually independent businesses that take on an NHS contract.
What's the situation with the GPs? It's not to berate them. It's, you know, the system's not working, I think, for them as well, where people are struggling to get GPs appointments. So that's clearly not working.
The same is true for dentists.
You'll struggle to get an NHS dentist. I'm lucky that I've got one. I mean incredibly lucky, to be honest, because if you go private, they can charge you a ridiculous amount, to the point where people are just going abroad to get it done, and going abroad has its own kind of dangers depending on where you go. But again, it's significantly cheaper. There's a reason why people are taking that option.
It's very, very few dentists that are actually directly employed by the NHS. Most are independent providers, and this is just an extension of.
This is a bad idea.
Is turning to the private sector to help tackle NHS waiting lists. 13 new community diagnostic centres will be opened across England to carry out an additional 750,000 scans, checks and tests.
You know, one of the issues is that the private sector takes from the same pool as the public sector for healthcare. So, you know, this doesn't change much. Just the only difference will be if the private sector has the equipment, because we know the NHS is I don't think it has all the equipment it needs. That's the only difference there. What you're doing is you'll take, say, a nurse or a radiologist from the NHS and stick them in the private sector where the equipment's already there. That's about it. And, you know, the private sector will charge you significantly more, and then you've lost an NHS radiologist potentially. And this is where, you know, this GP, Dr. Amir Khan, just lays this out perfectly, honestly.
Plan to try and get these astronomical waiting lists down, hospital waiting lists for general checks and diagnostics and so on, is to get the private sector heavily involved now.
Yeah, and we've got to bear in mind that the private sector have been involved in the NHS for quite a while, and it was Labour who introduced it initially, but the current legislation is making it easier for private sectors to get NHS contracts. The concern is really that these centres and any private organisation within the NHS cream off the low, complex, high-volume procedures.
Effectively, the easier ones. They'll take the easy cases. So that way there's less problems kind of later on down the line and initially as well, because at the end of the day, one of the last thing these kind of private providers want is to get sued, because getting sued is very expensive.
Leaving the complex stuff for the NHS.
So you're thinking that these diagnostic centres, the private ones, will be able to choose what kind of work that they are contracted to do?
There's always exclusion criteria whenever you refer anyone anywhere, particularly private organisations. So, for example, let's say someone's being referred for a hernia operation, and that hernia operation costs £1,000. Both the private sector and the NHS will both be given £1,000, but the private sector may say, well, we don't take patients with a lung condition or diabetes because we don't have the means to look after them afterwards, whereas the NHS don't have that choice, and they will take those very complex patients, have to look after them for days afterwards because they take a longer recovery, but get paid exactly the same. And the problem is then it starts to destabilise the NHS services. They may collapse. The private sector goes, OK, well, we're the only player in the game now. Let's put up our charges to the government.
And there it is, you know, take out the NHS. It's one of the things bigger players do. They'll reduce their costs to get rid of competition, then increase their costs again. And so, you know, you kind of stated out quite well there that the NHS will be stuck with the more complex cases, and it takes up more of their resources. So what that means is the NHS will struggle kind of in the longer run, whilst the private healthcare services taking the easier cases means that they won't struggle as much. And it will cost them less per kind of operation.
That whole thing costs us more. That's the real risk here. The other risk is these private sectors, when they are taking these low complex procedures, have no deal with training, so they may not train staff. And so junior staff who would normally do those procedures in NHS settings are being robbed of those simple procedures where they would start their training.
And, you know, again, that's another thing that makes sense. If you're, you know, if the easier cases are gone and you're stuck doing the complex ones, or you're not trained at all where you can't do any of the operations, how are you supposed to get actual experience? Because it's one thing knowing the theory behind things, it's another thing doing the actual practical side of it, which that's where, you know, things get real. That's where it gets difficult. And It's just that, once again, it's just the private sector just taken away from the public, in my opinion. Not the public sector, but just the British population. We shouldn't have to go down like this. We should have more training opportunities, and that's something where Rishi Sunak got pieced up on, and we'll talk about that in another video. Where one of the person who called in, the healthcare professional, just said, like, recruiting more staff is great, but if you don't have the experienced staff to help them and guide them, you're not going to get anywhere. No one's going to be there to train them. And here you can kind of see, if the easy operations aren't there, the easier procedures aren't available, how are you supposed to get the experience? If you do the complex ones and something goes wrong, that could end your career. That could genuinely end your career. And it would not be your fault, in my opinion, if you made a mistake on a very complex case when you don't have the experience. It's not fair on anyone, this system, apart from, the private healthcare providers who get to make more money. But I'm sure the man on Tufton Street will be happy with this kind of stuff happening. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Shouts out to the doc. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. And just one more kind of aside to add to this video, which is the UK actually had a really good healthcare system. So this is back in around 2010. I think the overall rankings from 2013, but it probably would have been, they would have done these kind of things in, say, 2012, 2011, and this before kind of the Tories hollowed out the NHS. So if you look at, the UK is just killing it at the moment. Oh, it was, sorry, killing it. Probably the wrong use of a phrase there. But you see the amount of number ones there, and obviously one being good. Effective care, number one. Number one in the world, overall ranking. Safe care, coordinated care, patient-centered care. Access, cost-related problems, we're the best. Timeliness of care, we were great. Efficiency, 3, probably down to bureaucracy. Sorry, timeliness of care, we were a 3, probably down to the wait list and the fact that the NHS has more availability than a lot of these other healthcare providers. And obviously we have a much unhealthier population compared to some of these other countries as well, so that would further add to it. Efficiency, number one for efficiency. When they say the NHS had to be more efficient, how was it the most efficient healthcare provider in the world? Equity, I'm not 100% sure about. Healthy lives were 10, because of the fact that British people are generally very unhealthy. I'm one of them. I'm very unhealthy. But the US is number 11, and if you look at the spending per capita, we have one of the lowest spends per capita, beaten by only New Zealand. That's it. They were the only country by the looks of it that beat us. Only New Zealand. Look at the US, highest healthcare spending per capita. Some of the lowest outcomes here. The only thing they win on is safe. Let's see, what's that? Effective care. They're number 3. The rest of them, they're near the bottom. Shocking. This was the state of the NHS kind of towards the end of New Labour. I just can't believe it was genuinely really good, and the Tories just hollowed it out. And the situation is that they've just broken the system that was good. Yeah, timeliness of care, 3 out of 11, not bad. Top 3 in the world for that, or top 3 out of the developed nations for that. Again, the NHS was great, and the Tories broke it. But yeah, that's the end of this one.